Tuesday brought some areas of some severe storms across South Dakota and Minnesota, with perhaps another little busy day on Wednesday. But as we get deeper into the weekend, that high pressure out east actually pushes to the west, and that means the weekend is going to be hot. Hello everybody, I'm meteorologist Brad Warner from Region Weather Live, your YouTube source for weather across the Dakotas and Minnesota. So for Wednesday, we have another chance of seeing some organized activity, much like we saw on Tuesday, and here's why. We've got just a little bit of help with the winds at the mid-levels in a couple of different spots. And we also have this trough, this little kink in the mid-levels that is going to be moving from southwest to northeast. It could provide just enough shear, just enough little bit of rotation to help aid some of these thunderstorms in a few select areas across our region for Wednesday. And we're expecting that humidity to remain high going in through Wednesday. As you can see, the temperatures, the dew points still in the mid to possibly even upper 60s across parts of Minnesota, here reaching into South Dakota, and some 60s scattered across North Dakota as well. And we have a few surface boundaries out there available in some areas across South Dakota, maybe across parts of Minnesota as well. And that's kind of where you see these wind shifts, these winds coming out of one direction, and then across that boundary, they're kind of coming out of a bit of a different direction. And that provides just a little bit of convergence at the surface, allowing thunderstorms to start to rise up and build throughout the atmosphere. Now, really, this whole area has the higher temperatures and the higher dew points to where our CAPE values are going to be big enough all across here to allow some thunderstorms to develop. And again, the CAPE value is like that powder in the keg, that gunpowder in them. The higher the number is, the more explosive perhaps these storms could become. So really everywhere has at least a chance of seeing some storms throughout the day on Wednesday. Now, while a lot of these areas are going to be difficult to pick out exactly where some of these storms are going to develop, a few areas kind of stand out more than others. Now, one is going to be this area basically into northeastern parts of South Dakota. If that little trough in the mid-levels does develop and pushes to the north and east, we could see a little band of some stronger storms pop up around that Aberdeenish area and move to the northeast. We might see some areas down in Sioux Falls. That's a little more questionable than I would think this area up here. And then we also have another area just kind of north of Lake Superior up in the Arrowhead region that could also develop some storms. Maybe some of these might be severe as well, but these are kind of the main focal points, or at least the areas I think that have the best chance for developing thunderstorms. And I think if anything's going to be severe of any type will probably be these in northeastern parts of South Dakota in the afternoon. Now, we're mainly going to be talking about winds of 60 miles per hour and hail 1 to 2 inches in diameter with these storms across South Dakota. And also, as is pretty typical, I think this time of year, you're more than likely going to see a few storms down in the southwestern parts of South Dakota as well. Some of those also potentially could be severe for a brief moment. Now, as we get into the evening hours and we lose that daylight, look at that, kind of what's been happening as we get to that 9, 10 o'clock. Most of these storms die off, and we're just left with a little bit of shower activity before they finally dissipate fully closer to midnight. Now, going into Thursday, this high pressure system that's out in the east begins to push a little bit more to the west, and we get a little bit of ridging that begins to develop across eastern portions of our area. And the help of the mid-level winds begin to shift back to the western parts of the Dakotas. And the only thing we might have a little bit on Thursday, and it's really hard to pick out in this particular model, but there might be just a little bit of a trough in here that does move northward through the afternoon on Thursday. But ultimately what I'm driving at is these areas out in the east are going to be more difficult to pick out where exactly some of these storms are going to develop. They're going to be more scattered to widely scattered in nature. And because the better mid-level support is out in the west, more than likely you're going to see a better chance of the storms down in the southwestern parts of South Dakota once again through Thursday. But as clockwork, as we get into the evening hours, closer to that 9, 10 o'clock, most of those storms will begin to diminish, and we're just going to be left with some showers until midnight, and then after that, most of that activity is going to go away. And then driving into Friday, Saturday, and more so even into Sunday, look at that high pressure system, how that just kind of meandered westward and sits almost right dead center on top of our area as we get into Sunday. Now we're expected to have those higher humidities, those higher dew points going into the weekend. Of course, with the high humidity and the higher temperatures, we're still going to have the higher CAPE values going throughout Friday, Saturday, and even into Sunday as well. But gosh, with that high pressure sitting overhead, especially as we get deeper into the weekend, it's really going to become difficult to say exactly where some of these storms are going to develop during the afternoon hours. They're more than likely going to be very widely scattered in nature because of that high pressure system overhead, and they're just going to be unpredictable in nature. So while there will be chances going into the weekend, it's really ultimately going to be widely scattered. It's going to be hard to say exactly where these storms are going to develop. And really, when you take a look at the grand scope of things, this is not going to be some widespread storm. These storms are going to pop up for a little bit and then fall apart. So some areas might receive a ½ inch and some areas will likely see none at all. In fact, if we take a look at the American model and how much rain it wants to predict, really, other than the storms that develop kind of late Wednesday and track across parts of South Dakota and into Minnesota, there's not a whole lot of rain that falls across the region going through the weekend. And the longer that ridge of high pressure dominates, the more concerning areas like this become as we continue to take a look at the U.S. drought monitor. These areas in southeastern parts of South Dakota remain in that moderate drought, as well as some areas down in the southwestern parts of the state. But I don't think I'm as concerned about that area just because they tend to see a few storms throughout the summer, just naturally given their location. North Dakota out in the west continues to see moderate drought still far out in the western parts of the state. Now, while some of these areas did get a little reprieve, boy, there's just not enough on the outlook to really help reprieve some of those drought conditions. And finally, Minnesota, really not too bad. Maybe just some abnormally dry areas here and there. A little bit, just a sliver of that moderate drought down in the far southwestern parts of the state, kind of coinciding with those areas down in southeastern parts of South Dakota. But generally for now, Minnesota really not sitting too bad. Now the outlooks by the Climate Prediction Center, we're way above normal here across the Dakotas and into Minnesota in the next 6 to 10 days. So this is from next Monday going into next Friday. So next week. And because of that high settling in, we've got maybe a little more of a wetter conditions out in the southwestern parts of South Dakota. Just like I said, not really too concerned about some of those drought conditions down in the far southwest, but out in the east, not much for rain prediction out be in that 6 to 10 day range. Then 8 to 14 days out, we're still looking above normal across the north temperature wise, and then our precipitation more of the same, those wetter conditions remaining mainly down in the southwestern parts of South Dakota, remaining dry out in the east. And taking a look at that upper level pattern and what the Climate Prediction Center is taking a look at is that high pressure system just continues to dominate our area and not allow any type of big systems in, just continues to allow warm, humid air into our region, maybe a few scattered thunderstorms here and there, but nothing organized until maybe perhaps the weekend beyond that or the week beyond that. Maybe we get a little more of a southwesterly flow as the low develops out in the west coast, but boy, that's quite a ways out there to say for sure. And finally, we're going to take a look at the high temperatures over the next few days. Here on Wednesday, we're looking at 80s and 90s generally across the region. Thursday, more of the same, 80s to around 90 degrees, a little bit cooler down in the southwest, and then of course in those areas you would normally see them across the North Shore, a little bit up in International Falls. Friday, those temperatures begin to climb a little more. We're seeing a lot of 80s, some low 90s across the region. Again, perhaps a little cooler in those same types of areas. Saturday, more of the same, 80s and 90s. And Sunday, we just go back into repeat 80s and 90s across the region. Maybe a little cooler. Maybe some of those areas stretch out just a little bit beyond the North Shore up here. Now, some of your areas down in southwestern South Dakota that were 70s earlier in the week, you're going to start to climb into the 80s as well. Now, I did take a bit of a drive over the Memorial weekend, and boy, you sure could tell it was wetter out in the central and kind of the western parts of the Dakotas, and as you got a little further east, things definitely got drier. It was a lot more dusty as you went eastward. So there are some areas out in the east that definitely could use some rain. In the eastern Dakotas, in across Minnesota still. Some areas across the Dakotas are a little better than those in the east. But boy, ultimately, we're just not seeing any of those big storms, those big severe storms. That's the good thing. At least we're not seeing those damaging, widespread storms on the horizon. But we need some rain in some of these areas, and there's just not any big system that's really saying, yep, here comes the rain for everybody. It's just going to be very spotty in nature, and that's the problem. Is some areas are going to get a little more than others, but boy, there's going to be a lot of areas that need it that just aren't going to see it. So perhaps, hopefully, we'll keep our fingers crossed that pattern does change in a couple weeks. But for now, that we're still talking, that's out there a ways. So we'll see what eventually transpires as we get closer to that time period. All right, everybody, for Region Weather Live, I am meteorologist Brad Werner. Don't forget to nail that like button down below, hit the thumbs up, and if you haven't done so, subscribe as well. Make sure you do that, because I do have a live feed up during the day that follows these severe storms. And while they're just more widely scattered in nature and not real strong in the effect that as long as you're not outside biking or hiking somewhere, you're going to be just fine. As long as you have some kind of shelter, even if it's a picnic shelter or a car. Most of these storms are really not going to be that strong. They're just going to be the wind to 60 mile per hour that could maybe knock a couple branches down and some hail. So they're just not that severe. So like I said, as long as you're not hiking or biking or get caught out in the middle of these things, you're going to be just fine. But I will have a live feed up just to track the radar and make sure you're seeing the latest forecasts and all that stuff that kind of goes with it. So make sure you subscribe down below. All right, that's all I got. And I will check in with you tomorrow night. Thank you all for watching, everybody. Have a good day.